Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for a light and fit remix. Like a crunchy storm of graham cookies, caramel pearls, and dark chocolate, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 light and fit remix varieties with craveable flavors and up to 120 calories and 10 grams of protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See remixyogurt.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
John, not John Mitchinson, John Williams, where are you? I can see where you are. You're in a room, but where in the world are you?
You have found me out. I am in a room. I am in a room in my apartment in Brooklyn, New York, a neighborhood called Williamsburg.
Is the Williamsburg of where the Hasidic community is?
There is a large Hasidic community in Williamsburg. There are a lot of Italian people who have lived here for a very long time. And then there are relatively younger people like me who are destroying the whole place. And it's also most famously or infamously the locale for the HBO series Girls, which is where it got its reputation from, I think.
Is your continuing presence in Williamsburg, John, a sign of its ongoing hipness or the opposite?
For the first several years I lived in New York, I lived in a neighborhood called Park Slope in Brooklyn, which is sort of a quiet family neighborhood. And then as I approached 40, I moved to Williamsburg. So I sort of did the reverse life commute. It is fairly hip in Williamsburg, but pretty gentrified at this point. So the real hipsters have gone 2 or 3 neighborhoods over toward the east.
Have we got enough there, Nick, for general ambience? We have, haven't we? We have. I'm not used to seeing Nikki look so dressed up and against the backdrop.
I feel very underdressed today. I feel like I ought to go and at least get a cardigan to put on.
So I've done that thing where you can touch up your appearance. You can make yourself on Zoom, get rid of your wrinkles.
How weird.
I've got rid of my wrinkles by shaving off my beard. Look at me. I'm 12 again, but with grey hair. Weird. It's a religious experience for us, I know.
I am having a fairly severe hair and beard trim on Tuesday, so that's one of the things I'm doing when I.
How low are you going to go?
I'll go as low as I feel like. I'm not going to go very low.
Yeah, don't ruin the brand.
Well, it's too many years now. So it could be getting on for 14 years. So it's a long time.
Wow.
The first time I met John Mitchinson, which I remember and he doesn't, was in 1990. When, as a youth...
Were you at a rave?
Yeah, in 1990. Yeah, that's right.
No,
I met him there. It was good. No, you remember, he didn't... No, that's years. His techno awakening is many years hence.
Many years in the future, yeah.
He came on a branch visit to the bookshop that I was working in.
Was that Earl's Court?
In Brighton.
Brighton.
Way back, 30 years ago. 30 years ago.
God.
It struck me at the time that he was a surprisingly young man.
Yeah.
He had black hair and he was clean shaven.
Yeah.
And he was very cheerful. And he was talking to a shop staffed
Once born, that's me.
Once born. With old Sheraton Hughes staff who'd converted over to Waterstones. When
it was a kind of an attempt to convert them to the faith of Waterstones, wasn't it? Or as Maggie Lennon once said, what the fuck is the man who does the bugs and ribbons doing standing on the stage next to Tim? I was known as the man who did the bags and ribbons, because that's apparently all she needed head office for.
The lack of deference in Waterstones was a marvellous thing, wasn't it?
It was a brilliant thing. We loved it.
Well, should we get on with it?
Let's do it. Hello and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast that gives new life to old books. Today you find us in Edinburgh in May 1901, were packed into the polished oak and marble magnificence of the Rhetoric and Humanities Lecture Theatre in the university's old college on Southbridge. At the front of the room, sitting on a raised platform at a wooden table, a distinguished, bearded American in his late 50s is looking through his papers, preparing to address the room.
It's quite like a normal episode of Blacklisted.
I'm John Mitchinson, the publisher of Unbound, the platform where readers crowdfund books they really want to read.
And I'm Andy Miller, author of The World Atlas of Cheeses. And I'd like to thank listener Ian for giving me permission to do that. Thank you, Ian.
That's marvellous.
And joining us today is, all the way from Williamsburg, USA, our first transatlantic link-up by satellite, John Williams.
Yay!
Thank you, guys. I am honored and frightened to be here.
John, please tell listeners, before I tell them who you are, tell them who you aren't.
Yeah, this will be a two-part backlisted. The first part will be dedicated to this. I am not a classical guitarist. I am not the Star Wars composer. I am not a former Cleveland Cavalier or Seattle Seahawk professional football player. I am not the author of Stoner. I'm not all. I mean, if you look at my disambiguation page on Wikipedia, it's not that I have an entry, but it's very funny. There's affection, like Australian sailors, and then there will be 9 listed. It'll go to the next subcategory.
Fortunately, there are no other writers called Andrew Miller worth bothering with. Anyway, joining us today is John Williams. He is his own special creation. He is the Daily Books editor and a staff writer at the New York Times. He is what he is, where he has worked since 2011. Before that, John spent several years on the editorial side of book publishing and founded and ran the website The Second Pass, which was built partly on the love of older and more obscure books. And you sent us that description, and I realised that you were sort of having a dig, really, weren't you, John? You were sort of saying Backlisted is nothing but an audio ripoff of your website, The Second Pass.
Well, we'll talk about royalties afterwards.
Yeah. We met because you commissioned a book that I was writing in the States that it took me a long time to finish, but you also let me write a couple of things for that website, The Second Pass. Second Pass was really brilliant website. Is it still archived and available online?
It is archived. I think thesecondpass.com, everything is still up there, including your 2 rather great essays. One about a book, one of many books you've turned me on to, which was...
Was it Absolute Beginners?
Absolute Beginners.
Absolute Beginners, yes, which I loved and which you wrote about at length, but also sort of weaved in some of your own personal story. So that's up there. Yeah, it still exists for people to go back, and you're kind to say that it was great. It was great because people like you contributed to it when it was great.
As Danny Baker says, let's stop lacing daisies into one another's hair. And what I wondered about The Second Pass, because The Second Pass, you were doing that about 10 years ago, weren't you?
Yeah, about 10, 11 years ago.
I think the world has changed quite a lot. I think in the last 10 years, what with ebooks and the internet and one thing and another, it's actually much easier to both learn about and get hold of older books or books that had been out of print. What are the books that are there books that you covered that are far less obscure now than when your contributors were writing about them?
Well, one in particular comes to mind. I mean, that was part of the whole purpose of the website. Those changes were certainly starting back then. I think they've increased in the past 10 years, but I think even in my initial editor's note, I said something about the ease with which you can find even out of print books. And one of the first essays we had in the section for sort of older and out of print books was an essay by a friend of mine named Deborah Shapiro, who's a novelist, and she wrote about Eve's Hollywood by Eve Babbitt's, which at the time I hadn't heard of. And she sent me, I think, a picture of, there was some incredible art, maybe the author photo. You can imagine, if you're familiar with Eve Babbitt's, I think she was wearing some kind of tiger
For
print.
sure.
And then she sent me a JPEG of the acknowledgments in the book, which she sort of starts the essay with, which is this hysterical list of her painkillers and therapists and all the people she thanks, people and objects that she thanks. And that's become here a pretty big cult hit through the New York Review of Books line, which is one of the many places doing great work in rescuing books and bringing them back.
I mean, I'd never heard of Eve's Hollywood before reading about it on The Second Pass. And It was several years before I read it, and we talked about it on, if people want to find it, we talked about it on the Huysmans episode that we recorded in Paris. I mean, it's one of the books that people who listen to Backlisted go off, find, read, and love. That's a fairly consistent pattern. That is a funny book.
Oh, she's hysterical. In all kinds of ways.
Yeah, quite. So,
the book we're here to talk about is The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, younger brother of Henry, professor of philosophy at Harvard, who delivered 20-hour-long talks as part of the prestigious Gifford Lecture Series at the University of Edinburgh in 1901 and 1902. And the texts of these were gathered together and first published in book form in 1902 by Longmans, Green and Co., with the subtitle A Study in Human Nature. It was an instant bestseller, and it's a landmark book that continues to influence our attitudes to and our understanding of religious experience in all its diverse kinds.
I'd just like to say I've spent several weeks, John Williams, living with this book, because it does. Nikki is the queen of the great question on this podcast. Is this book easy to read? She will be waiting to ask, right? This book is easy to read, but you want to pace yourself, listeners, is my advice. So this isn't a page turner. It's up to you to turn the pages. Would you agree?
How long do you think it should take an average reader?
Well, I would say
we're not prescriptive like that, Nikki. But
I did it with the assistance of the audiobook.
Very good idea.
Specifically, the one read by John Pruden, which is on Audible. And actually, that was a really great way to do it because the book was originally written as lectures. So each chapter is about an hour long. I did it over the space of about 3 weeks, listening to it mostly, and then rereading bits if they felt a bit chewy or I felt I hadn't quite got them. So I guess what I'm saying to the listeners is it is really worth your time, but take your time. Do you think, Mitch?
I totally agree, and I love the. I've also listened to some of them on that very recording, and the way the book is structured is it is a dense book, but it's a very well read audiobook, and he was apparently a very, very good lecturer. In fact, some of the criticism that he attracted early on was that it was too popular. He packed 300 people into the hall, whereas this was about the 15th or 16th in the series of Gifford lectures.
We'll come on to this, but it felt to me like it was written by somebody who knew they were good at it.
He was exactly right. He's a kind of a very, very, very good public speaker and lecturer.
John, this is the book that you so wanted to talk about on this podcast. Can you tell us a bit about when you first encountered it or the work of William James?
Yes, I should say that I did want to talk about it, but I also was not expecting you to say yes and was pleasantly surprised when you did. So I'm glad we're doing it. I think I read an essay of James's called The Will to Believe, which is, I have a collection of his essays of the same title long time ago, early this century. And so sort of got interested in him that way. And then I bought The Varieties of Religious Experience at a bookstore in New York, sat on it for a few years. And in the summer of 2007, I picked it up because I was interested in it. But the reason that it made such a difference to me, I was watching, I think it was a live event that you guys did at a bookstore where John was describing the start of the show and how one of the things you wanted to get at was not just obscure books, but books that changed people's lives. And that got me to thinking that, I heard that after I chose this book, but there really is I can't say that there's an individual book that has changed my life in general. Books collectively certainly have. This is the one that comes closest, though. And I think I probably can say that it changed certainly my mood at the moment, which was very downcast. And I was going through a hard time. And the book felt very much like a consolation to me. And James felt very much like a living friend.
So you're twice born.
I am twice born. It taught me a lot of things, obviously, but it also confirmed a lot of the things that I feel instinctively about the world, and his sort of many-sidedness I felt very sympathetic to. And I was someone who was raised with some religion and had the expectation of, my mother very much wanted us all to be religious, and we all drifted from it at various times. I read a lot about religion, and I don't practice any myself, but very interested in the subject, and I do feel a lot of those sort of the yearnings that we'll be talking about, I'm sure, throughout the episode.
Mitch, had you read this before?
No, is the honest answer. Although I had quoted it liberally because it's one of those books that you
Not
get.
Personally.
Well, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You read bleeding chunks of it, and you sort of know that it's in the background. I'd read maybe a couple of essays by James, and was sort of he was one of those people I'd always thought at some point in my life I must sit down and actually read that book because it's so meshes with all my interests, and have not been disappointed, I have to say. I mean, it's quite ambitious considering it was in 1902. Religion is such a difficult word, isn't it? It makes people think of organized religion, and it's emphatically not a book about organized religion.
James himself very explicitly several times in the lectures says that he is not very interested in institutional religion, but personal experience and personal religion. And so I think it is a book obviously about religion, but I think I said somewhere that I think its subtitle is actually a more accurate title for it, which is A Study of Human Nature. I find it to be a much more broad sort of searching about human psychology and human need.
I've got the Oxford University Press edition here of the Varieties of Religious Experience. Have you got that, John?
Yep.
Mitch has got that as well. Hey, John Williams, what have you got? Oh, he's got a filthy mass market Penguin edition. Look at that.
It is not it is a trade paperback. It is a perfectly sized Penguin classic.
Listen to us laughing about the technical terms for different formats.
That's such an in-joke.
Oh, appalling. Anyway, here's the blurb on the Oxford copy, right? I think this is pretty good. The Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902, is William James's classic survey of religious belief in its most personal and often its most heterodox aspects, asking questions such as how we define evil to ourselves, the difference between a healthy and a divided mind, the value of saintly behaviour, and what animates and characterises the mental landscape of sudden conversion. James's masterpiece stands at a unique moment in the relationship between belief and culture. Faith in institutional religion and dogmatic theology was fading away, and the search for an authentic religion rooted in personality and subjectivity was a project conducted as an urgent necessity. With psychological insight, philosophical rigour, and a determination not to jump to the conclusion that in tracing religion's mental causes we necessarily diminish its truth or value, in the Varieties of Religious Experience, James wrote a truly foundational text for modern belief.
That is longer and better than the one on my book.
Nikki, did that communicate selling points to you?
I think so. Yeah. John, what's on your book?
Mine says, there's a little extra blurb at the top that says, standing at the crossroads of psychology and religion, this groundbreaking work applied the scientific method to humankind's religious behavior. William James believed individual religious experiences, rather than the precepts of organized religions, were the backbone of the world's spiritual life. His discussions of conversion, repentance, mysticism, and saintliness, and his observations on actual personal religious experiences all support this thesis. In his introduction, I think you guys will get a kick out of this name, and it's a good introduction. In his introduction, Martin E. Marty discusses how James's pluralistic view of religion led to his remarkable tolerance of extreme forms of religious behavior, his challenging, highly original theories, and his welcome lack of pretension in all of his observations on the individual and the divine. I would stress the lack of pretension. I would say the one sort of overarching thing I would say about this book to someone like Nikki or anyone who is, really just here trying to be sold a little bit is that it is both completely unpretentious. He's got this very conversational voice for someone so rigorous. And it is also not, even though it is dense and you have to get used to its rhythms, he's perfectly comprehensible.
As you're reading it, does it make you think of your own life and your own experiences?
Speaking for myself, almost all it made me think about was my own psychology and reactions to the world, and a bit those of people I know or care about. And it felt like a guidebook to human nature, really, more than anything else.
The thing that is most astonishing about it, and why I would give it a whirl, Nikki, is that because it's about these experiences, and in some ways it's a really interesting anthology of experience, both experience that people have written about, but also first-hand experience. There's some amazing first-hand experience that he's gathered. That you read it in the same way maybe as you might read Freud, but without the heavy overlay of I'm trying to prove a theory. What's brilliant about William James is he is the pragmatic empiricist who just wants to gather the evidence. And when he does come up with his kind of his sort of declarations of what he feels at the end, they're very open-ended. So none of this book feels, even though it was written 120 years ago, none of it feels out of date. None of it feels old-fashioned.
We should say that William James devised, he's a follower of pragmatism and a great proponent of pragmatism as a philosophy. And the phrase radical empiricism, in terms of what John was just talking about, the phrase the divided self comes from William James. The actual phrase, the varieties of religious experience, which is passed into general parlance, I think anyway, is of course another Jamesian motto. Before we move on to the next Beatle-led discussion, John, could you read us a little bit from the varieties of religious experience, just so we can get a flavour of how William James talks to the reader?
Yes, I would be more than happy to. This is from a 2-part lecture that I think is probably my favorite in the series, called The Sick Soul. A lot of what James is writing about in that pragmatism is about how to feel better, essentially. And a lot of the book is about really what it feels like to feel depressed or pessimistic. So this is a page here where he talks about that. To begin with, how can things so insecure as the successful experiences of this world afford a stable anchorage? A chain is no stronger than its weakest link, and life is, after all, a chain. In the healthiest and most prosperous existence, how many links of illness, danger, and disaster are always interposed? Unsuspectedly, from the bottom of every fountain of pleasure, as the old poet said, something bitter rises up. A touch of nausea, a falling dead of the delight, a whiff of melancholy, things that sound a knell. For fugitive as they may be, they bring a feeling of coming from a deeper region, and often have an appalling convincingness. The buzz of life ceases at their touch, as a piano string stops sounding when the damper falls upon it. Of course, the music can commence again, and again and again, at intervals. But with this, the healthy-minded consciousness is left with an irremediable sense of precariousness. It is a bell with a crack. It draws its breath on sufferance and by an accident. Even if we suppose a man so packed with healthy-mindedness as never to have experienced in his own person any of these sobering intervals, still, if he is a reflecting being, he must generalize and class his own lot with that of others. And doing so, he must see that his escape is just a lucky chance and no essential difference. He might just as well have been born to an entirely different fortune. And then indeed, the hollow security. What kind of a frame of things is it of which the best you can say is, "Thank God, it has let me off clear this time"? Is not its blessedness a fragile fiction? Is not your joy in it a very vulgar glee, not much unlike the snicker of any rogue at his success? If indeed it were all success, even on such terms as that. But take the happiest man, the one most envied by the world, and in 9 cases out of 10, his inmost consciousness is one of failure. Either his ideals and the line of his achievements are pitched far higher than the achievements themselves, or else he has secret ideals of which the world knows nothing, and in regard to which he inwardly knows himself to be found wanting.
That's 120 years old. I mean, I know there's a certain archaic kind of vocabulary to it, but even so, you can hear the willingness to reach out to the audience, to whoever was going to turn up in Edinburgh.
I think that Sick Soul, that double chapter is my favorite as well, because the presentation of depression, and he does that thing in the middle of it where he claims that there's a French person who has having a bad depressive episode, and it turns out we discover that it was in fact him. It was him writing about his own depression. I could read a short little passage of it. While in this state of philosophic pessimism and general depression of spirits about my prospects, I went one evening into a dressing room in the twilight to procure some article that was there, when suddenly there fell upon me without any warning, just as if it came out of the darkness, a horrible fear of my own existence. Simultaneously, there arose in my mind the image of an epileptic patient whom I'd seen in the asylum, a black-haired youth with greenish skin, entirely idiotic, who used to sit all day on one of the benches, or rather shelves against the wall, with his knees drawn up against his chin, and the coarse grey undershirt, which was his only garment, drawn over them and enclosing his entire figure. He sat there like a sort of sculptured Egyptian cat or Peruvian mummy, moving nothing but his black eyes and looking absolutely non-human. This image and my fear entered into a species of combination with each other. That shape I am, I felt, potentially. Nothing that I possess can defend me against that fate, if the hour for it should strike for me as it has struck for him.
So it's a religious book, but it's also religion informed by what the developments of psychology, John, that have been taking place in the late 19th century and now here into the earlier 20th century, right?
Well, James was first and foremost a philosopher and psychologist. And that's why to sort of think about the book as a book about religion is both accurate and not enough. Religion is such a huge subject that it allowed him to get at these other things, I think, that primarily interested him, including, as Lenin would say, and that was a brilliant choice, how to measure our pain, how to overcome our pain. But to me, I always describe this as a book primarily about psychology. And that's not just because I don't want to scare people off of it, because I don't think they're as interested in reading about religion as I am. I genuinely think that is at its heart what this is. He spends a lot of time on healthy mindedness, but you get the sense, like that brilliant part that John read a minute ago, that James doesn't really cast his lot with the healthy minded. He doesn't sympathize with them, and he doesn't think they need the help. If you're healthy minded, what you really need, I guess, is a reflection of why you think the world is full of good, why it's a bounteous place, what your place in it should be. And that's all fine. But he's really interested in people who reach a breaking point, essentially, and almost break through their ego. There's a lot of vaguely new age material in here too, which he's very friendly toward in his open-mindedness. And, he's talking maybe 40 years after the world started to tangle with Darwin. And it's still fresh, I think, that sense of not knowing where to turn, but being interested in it.
One of the things I really enjoyed about the book was the way you've both referred to it, but the way James uses secondary sources and how he doesn't prefer types of secondary source. So he's very happy to pull in eyewitness reports that are barely literate, right up to Tolstoy. So, and he specifically talks about Tolstoy's Confession, which is an incredible book in its own right. I'd just like to read a little bit from the bit that William James draws to our attention. And again, it's from The Sick Soul. Tolstoy describes an experience that clearly James had gone through. In fact, John, that he'd just written about in the bit you read. He's talking about somebody French, but he's talking about himself. A crisis not merely of faith, but an existential crisis of thinking, why am I here? I ought to be happy. I ought to be satisfied. I ought to be fulfilled. Not only am I none of those things, I'm the opposite. I'm on the brink of suicide. And he quotes this section from a confession by Tolstoy. And it was so pleasing to see this again. And he talks about an Oriental fable of a traveller surprised in the desert by a wild beast. Seeking to save himself from the fierce animal, the traveller jumps into a well with no water in it. But at the bottom of this well, he sees a dragon waiting with open mouth to devour him. And the unhappy man, not daring to go out lest he should be prey of the beast, not daring to jump to the bottom lest he should be devoured by the dragon, clings to the branches of a wild bush which grows out of one of the cracks of the well. His hands weaken, and he feels that he must soon give way to certain fate, but still he clings, and sees 2 mice, one white, one black, evenly moving around the bush to which he hangs and gnawing off its roots. The traveller sees this and knows that he must inevitably perish. But while thus hanging, he looks about him and finds on the leaves of the bush some drops of honey. These he reaches with his tongue and licks them off with rapture. Thus I hang upon the boughs of life, knowing that the inevitable dragon of death is waiting ready to tear me, and I cannot comprehend why I am thus made a martyr. I try to suck the honey which formerly consoled me, but the honey pleases me no longer. And day and night, the white mouse and the black mouse gnaw the branch to which I cling. I can see but one thing, the inevitable dragon and the mice. I cannot turn my gaze away from them. I mean, first and foremost, you told the genius of Tolstoy, of course. Yeah. But the Varieties of Religious Experience is one of the ways that William James seeks to address that dilemma. We're all hanging from the bough. Should we seek out the honey? Should we take our eyes off the mice? What should we do?
I mean, also, he is brave. You know, he's prepared to put his mind where his mouth is. And he takes drugs. He takes nitrous oxide, famously.
And why does he do that, Mitch?
You know, he's a scientist. Part of him is he wants to try it. And one of the unexpected kind of delights of nitrous oxide is that it means he starts to enjoy reading Hegel.
If you say so. Is that what the oxide addicts get into, Hegel?
I love stuff. He says this. The effects will, of course, vary within a very individual, just as they vary in the same individual from time to time. But it's probable in the former case, as in the latter, a generic resemblance will obtain. With me, as with every other person whom I've heard, the keynote of the experience is the tremendously exciting sense of an intense metaphysical illumination. Truth lies open to the view in depth, beneath depth of almost blinding evidence. The mind sees all the logical relations of being with an apparent subtlety and instantaneity to which its normal consciousness offers no parallel. Only as sobriety returns, the feeling of insight fades, and one is left staring vacantly at a few disjointed words and phrases, as one stares at the cadaverous-looking snow peak from which the sunset glow has just fled, or at the black cinder left by an extinguished brand. Now, that's brilliant. There's a famous story about him, which is that he'd taken nitrous oxide and he wrote down on a piece of paper what he thought was the meaning of the universe. And when he came down from it, what was written on the piece of paper is this phrase: the smell of turpentine pervades throughout.
But you know what? He didn't just try nitrous oxide. He tried chloral hydrate, and he wrote about that. He tried amyl nitrate, and he wrote about that. And he tried peyote to try and free the mind so his ass would follow. He tried that. You know, that story John just told, the first time the Beatles met Bob Dylan, famously, Bob Dylan turned them on to marijuana. And Paul McCartney tells a story about he smoked his first joint and suddenly everything was revealed to him. And he said to Mal Evans, "You've got to get me a piece of paper and a pen. You've got to get me a piece of paper and a pen. I've got it. I've got to write it down and just hang on to it till tomorrow morning." So Mal Evans, who's the Beatles roadie and gopher, he goes off, he finds the stone Paul McCartney, a piece of paper, a bit of pen, and Paul scribbles it down. And they go on to enjoy the rest of the evening with Bob Dylan. McCartney wakes up the next morning and there's the bit of paper folded by his bed with the meaning of life on it. And he opens it up and it says, "There are 5 levels." It's like the Jamesian experience through the prism of the Beatles again. But
there are 5 levels. So now we have to figure out what the levels are. But to answer that question, I mean, in terms of why he took the drugs, I think he has this great line in the book that I can't find, of course, now, about how, you know, if there's something that can give us some wisdom, why wouldn't we do it? And he's just interested in anything that might enlighten or help or anything. He's just very open-minded, and that's sort of his trademark quality.
But actually, that's interesting because religious experiences for many are in taking drugs, aren't they? And that's how, you know, that's why ayahuasca is so popular. And, you know, so that's what people do.
There's a really good book by an American writer named John Horgan, who's a popular science writer, and it's called Rational Mysticism. And it's about the sort of border between science and religion. It's from about 15 years ago.
We may well come on to spiritual experiences induced by imbibing substances. We might do, we might not. We've all talked about the Varieties of Religious Experience as a repository of not just William James's writing, but other interesting or striking writing. So when the philosopher Mary Midgley appeared on Desert Island Discs in 2005, she was asked about her luxuries, and this is what she said.
Now, Mary, I have to ask you 3 questions. If you could only take one of those 8 records, which one would you take? Oh, my. I think it has to be Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on a Theme of Tallis. I think that's a kind of all-purpose one, that would always make one feel better, whatever might be going on.
And a book you can take with you as well as the Bible and Shakespeare.
Here, no trouble. William James's Varieties of Religious Experience. This is 500 pages long. It's bung full of excellent stories about people's different religious attitudes and what got them into them and out of them, and the thoughts that he has about them are jolly interesting. I know that this will work because last summer I was actually quite ill and I was convalescing and I thought, oh dear, what am I going to read? I know I've got War and Peace, but it won't last me, you see, the whole of August. And I took this Varieties of Religious Experience off the shelf, thinking it was pretty good, and indeed it is absolutely marvellous. You can read it many times without the slightest trouble.
John Williams, that rings really true, right? The idea that it's a plural text, a pluralist
Well,
text.
first of all, one of the other books of his I've read, a philosophy book, is called A Pluralistic Universe, and that's very much the William James. I mean, I have so many things to say about that. First is that I had no idea that Mary Midgley had done a Desert Island Disc, so thank you for that, because I need to go back and listen to that whole thing. And I love Mary Midgley, so I'm buffeted by the fact that she also loves William James, and she has my inner voice, I think, much like Anita Bruckner. I think I sound like Mary Midgley on the inside of me. But yes, it's funny that you read from Tolstoy, and I always forget when I dip back into it, I'm reminded of how many other sources there are, and how often he's quoting at length other sources, and he has a great eye for that, and he's a very trustworthy curator. So even though he's interrupting himself all the time, it's almost always for a good reason and with a good text. And then you'll get Tolstoy, and then you'll see something like, I noticed the other night I was rereading it. I read this quote and I think, oh, that's interesting. I look down at the footnote and it says something like the life and memoirs of Henry Thomas Butterworth, Lebanon, Ohio, 1886. And so it's just a wide net that he is casting, from everything from Tolstoy to just very everyday experiences.
Time now for an advert.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
So we've talked about it as a religious book, and we've talked about it as a work of psychology. Maybe I should say just a bit about who William James was. So the James family, there are 5 of them. William James is the eldest. He's the son of the Swedenborgian theologian Henry James Sr., and he is, of course, the brother of both the prominent novelist Henry James and the diarist Alice James, and 2 younger Jameses who nobody... There's a definite kind of Salinger / Wes Anderson theme running through this, right? About a highly intellectual family like the Tenenbaums or the Glasses. William James and Henry James didn't have a really close relationship, did they? They kind of had a fairly sparky relationship. And I thought you might enjoy this letter that William wrote to younger brother Henry in 1905 about his most recent novel. I just want you to think, here are 2 brothers with a few years difference between them who are also William James and Henry James. Both those elements are constantly in play, right?
In their early 60s. It's great.
Here we go. William James writes, I read your Golden Bowl a month or more ago, and it put me, as most of your recenter long stories have put me, in a very puzzled state of mind. I don't enjoy the kind of problem, especially when, as in this case, it is treated as problematic. And the method of narration by interminable elaboration of suggestive reference, brackets, I don't know what to call it, but you know what I mean, close brackets, goes agin the grain of all my own impulses in writing. And yet, in spite of it all, brackets, little brother, there is a brilliancy and cleanness of effect, and in this book especially, a high-toned social atmosphere that are unique and extraordinary. Your methods and my ideals seem the reverse, the one of the other, and yet I have to admit your extreme success in this book. But why won't you, just to please brother, sit down and write a new book with no twilight or mustiness in the plot, with great vigour and decisiveness in the action, no fencing in the dialogue, no psychological commentaries, and absolute straightness in the style. Isn't that's lovely, right? That's what everybody would like to say to Henry James.
For God's sake, man.
Get to the point.
Yeah, beautiful.
John, did you say that you look more beneficently on Henry James as a result of reading William James?
Well, I think that's giving me too much credit. I hadn't really given Henry much of a chance. I think I probably read him too young. I felt all the things that William expresses in that letter, and I put it down, and I never really gave it all that much thought again, even though I figured I'd go back someday and try him again. But no, it just between falling in love with this person and figuring that someone who shares his family would be pretty interesting too. But it was really Richardson's biography that put me back toward Henry, because it's great on all the family dynamics. The family is endlessly fascinating. There are dozens of books about them. And Richardson really gets at their relationship, the thorniness of it, but also ultimately there's a very moving scene, toward the end about them. And I think I read The Americans first, which is kind of a weird choice, but I liked it a lot. But eventually I read the, obviously Portrait of a Lady, which is the masterpiece, I think. Yeah, so I've read 5 or 6 of his novels now.
When William James died, Henry James said, this sounds like one of those things like of somebody trying, I'm not saying they didn't love one another. They clearly did love one another. But Henry James said of his brother, my brother had an endless spontaneity of mind. It's almost like a backhanded compliment. My brother had an endless spontaneity of mind. And Alice James, who I think died before William James, she described him as a blob of mercury. That he was what you can read in the Varieties of Religious Experience. The idea of literature as an expression of personality. Actually, I think that does come through, however artfully rerouted, in the Varieties of Religious Experience. He's endlessly fascinated in things, and he doesn't want to be stuck in one area forever. So we've talked about the book as a religious book, as a psychological text, or as a work of philosophy. What's the thing that binds all those things together? It's the God of the text, which is the author. It's the author's personality, because it's the best kind of book. Because they are interested in it, you should be interested in it.
Bravo, yes.
And that is his ideal in the end. Really, is he was an artist. He was a failed artist himself.
Mm-hmm.
And when he says religion, he takes it to mean the feelings, acts, and experiences of individual men in their solitude, so far as they apprehend themselves to stand in relation to whatever they may consider the divine.
Well, now that is the perfect definition. Individually, whatever we consider the divine. I would like to round out the conversation about the book, and given that it's given us so much food for thought, by asking each of you what you consider to be the closest thing that you have experienced personally to a spiritual experience or a religious experience in those terms, in those Jamesian terms. Not organised religion necessarily, though I suppose it can be organised religion, but in terms of just you and your consciousness. So, why don't we go round the group? Mitch, why don't you go first?
Well, I think the nearest I've had to anything like that was before I'd moved to the village I now live in. I used to occasionally come here, and I used to visit the church, which I loved greatly. It's an amazing building. One of the reasons it's amazing, it's surrounded by trees and it's got no stained glass windows, so the light is incredible. And I remember sitting in there one winter's afternoon not because I was having communing with God, but because it's a space, one of those. I think it's the T.S. Eliot line: a place where prayer has been made valid. People have worshipped whatever they believed in over 1,000 years there, and I was completely conscious of my grandfather sitting next to me, who had died 6 months earlier, and it was not there was no doubt in my mind at all that he was with me. I've never had that experience before or since, and its influence, I think, it gave me some kind of weird permission later on when I was thinking about moving to the village I now live in. It was that experience was, and I I'd say we've baptized all our children there. We were married in that church. We buried Rachel's sister in the churchyard. Yeah, and that's as close as I've ever got. And that would come into the chapter, the reality of the unseen in this book.
And do you consider yourself once born or twice born? I'm going to ask everyone this. Do you consider yourself once born or twice born? Once born, you're happy. You're a happy person. Twice born, you need a religious experience.
Yeah, I think I'm liminal. Actually, I think I'm fundamentally once born, but I have sometimes the plank, as Emilia Dickinson, the plank in Reason breaks. There's a great description of Whitman being as Fotherington Thomas as anyone has ever been in the book, about never getting cross, never being cross with anybody, never criticizing anybody. My best self is once born.
I think the phrase "I think I'm liminal" should be the title of your solo album. John, tell us, if you can, if you've had a moment.
Yeah, it was difficult to think about this, and John actually just triggered something that I'm going to say. This was not what I had prepared, but it's definitely the answer for me. The first time that I visited the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas, which is a non-denominational, essentially it's a work of art by Rothko. It's a octagonal shaped building that you walk in, and it has his sort of signature paintings, but they're all in, as much as this is a contradiction, various shades of black. They're very, very dark colors that are barely distinguishable from each other. It's very quiet in there, and it's obviously temperature controlled because it's in Texas. And I stood there, and you have these experiences, I think, with art and with nature that I don't think always apply. I mean, the first time when I walked into the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona a couple of years ago, with a couple of hours of sun left in the day, and the sun was just streaming throughout the whole place, that was an incredible feeling of awe. And I did think about religious things, obviously, because of the setting, but I wouldn't call it this. This was more that it turned me inside myself and made me disappear at the same time, which is, I think, part of what James is getting at. It made me both highly conscious of my own sensations and feeling, and it also made me feel as if everything, including me, was meaningless, and that was okay. And it moved me very, very deeply. And so that would be my, James says that mystical experiences have no intellectual content whatsoever, a true mystical experience. No. And so you can't really articulate them.
Yes, by asking you, all I can ask you to do is edge towards the thing itself, because the thing itself probably can't be articulated.
He quotes someone else saying, "Have you not felt that your real soul was imperceptible to your mental vision except in a few hallowed moments?"
Beautiful.
Aren't you going to ask me how many times I've been born?
Would you say you are once born, twice born, or neither?
I'm going to crib from Mitch a little bit here, if I may call him Mitch. I think that temperamentally I am once born. I think that people who know me would say that the way I express myself is once born, but I definitely feel like I am someone who is waiting to be twice born and thinking it's probably never going to happen.
Oh, this is good. And we're just about to turn to our producer, Nikki Birch, where Nikki, you were saying, yes. You were said to me earlier, you were hedging round how personal you thought this should be, right? Weren't you? Because it could be really personal. But all I want is a moment. I want like a moment where you thought, wow, there's something bigger than me, whatever that might be, whenever that might be.
So can I go with twice born, once born first?
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. So I'm definitely once born, straight up, once born. occasionally at Glastonbury weekend, twice born. But most of the rest of the year, once born.
That's great.
Okay. So religious experience, given that I am once born, I wouldn't say I've had a deeply religious experience, but I am part of a cult. I don't know if I told you this. So I have, I'm not going to say what the cult's called because I don't want to publicize it, but let's just call it a tree cult. Okay. So I'm part of a tree cult where me and a number of other people get together. It involves spending a lot of time amongst the trees. So yeah, camping, hanging out by the fire.
Forest bathing,
yeah. Anyway, so this weekend, just back from something similar, having been in lockdown for many, many months, there's been no tree culting, The cult has not gathered, right? We have not spent the time in the woods. We have not hung out. We have not breathed in nature, and we've not been together. And this weekend, we had our first connection. We kind of met again, some of us, not all of us. There's actually thousands of people in this cult, which makes it sound really creepy, but it's not. It's pretty amazing.
This is way beyond anything I was hoping for.
Right, okay. So anyway, this weekend, we spent some time in the woods and by a river, and watching members of the tree cult, one by one, as they emerged from their car, to see where they were, to see they were being outside, to get straight into the river because it was lovely and sunny.
Yeah.
Everybody just walked one by one. There's only about 10 of us. It wasn't many of us, but and everyone's face was just like, you can just imagine. It was just jubilant. It was ecstatic. Wow. It was like, oh my God, I'm back again.
Amazing.
In the woods, in the water.
I mean, naked in the water, or just do you have kind of...
No, in swimming costumes, John. It's not that kind of cold. Obviously, if you came, you could get naked. It's up to you, be yourself. But there are children.
It's a non-judgmental sect.
Well, actually, there's children involved, so we do like to keep swimming costumes on.
Important.
Yeah. Anyway, so that I'd say was a religious experience, not just for me, but and watching everybody enjoying the fact that they weren't no longer at home. That was pretty wonderful.
Yeah, so there's a mixture of things there. So there's the back to nature element, but there's also doing it with other people. So it's a communal experience, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned Glastonbury. That's another kind of the spiritual moment of a festival or dancing or any of those things. They all seem to fit to me.
Burning Man, famously.
Yeah. Burning Man, right. Okay. Yeah. All my spiritual experiences, I tried to address this as seriously as I could in a non-ironic, flinching away from the topic, because obviously I'm not very comfortable with anything that can't be flinched away from. And I'm doing it then. I'm making a joke about it, but it's actually true. All my spiritual experiences are to do with books and music and art and film and TV and cultural experiences. Always. That when it comes down to it, always. And they're always solitary. They aren't communal. And I would describe myself as twice born and still waiting. Each epiphany for me is a pointer to the next epiphany. It'll be like William James, if I may be so bold. It'll be a sad day when I stop looking. It's better to travel, it's better to travel and find new things and find those moments. And actually, I had one of these, and I am going to call it spiritual. I had one of these epiphanies in the run up to this episode. If you listen to if you're a Patreon subscriber and you can listen to Lot Listed, you'll hear me talk about this in more depth on that episode. But I read initially out of duty and increasingly out of enthusiasm everything written by J.D. Salinger in the space of about a fortnight. And I had dismissed J.D. Salinger's work when I was 19 because it didn't speak to me. And all I can tell you is at the age of 52, having just read the Varieties of Religious Experience, it really spoke to me loud and clear, especially the short stories in For Esme with Love and Squalor, or as it's called in the States, 9 stories. And even as I was reading them, I was thinking, goodness, these seem connected with the Varieties of Religious Experience. I was thinking about William James writing in the Varieties of Religious Experience about how even epiphanies are the result of gradual movements towards moments rather than lightning bolts. So he discusses in the book, and I was thinking, wow, it's like reading William James has primed me to have this experience, but that doesn't mean this experience isn't valid. And what struck me about the stories in 9 Stories, and as I read through Salinger's work, is that it's profoundly concerned with spirituality. You know, we think of him in terms of The Catcher in the Rye and whatever our prejudices are about The Catcher in the Rye. And whenever we read Catcher in the Rye, and we think about his retreat from the world, but we don't think about him as somebody who in his work is trying to find an accommodation between the demands of the secular world, the American world, the commercial world in which he's been born, once born, and the sense of something bigger. The sense of a kind of Jamesian need to reach out and find something else. And Mitch and I both noticed that in Salinger's very first published story, which is called The Young Folks, published in a magazine in 1940 and available only on the internet and nowhere else. You'll have to look for it. There's a character called William Jameson Jr. It's like there's a joke at the very beginning in the second paragraph of anything J.D. Salinger ever published about a character who is entirely without any spiritual element whatsoever, and his name is William James' son. You know, so the clue is there at the very beginning of the work. And then as Salinger goes on, it seemed to me, as I read these over the space of a week, I just thought, wow, this guy is... Why would this guy... It seems common sense. It all fell away. I thought, well, why would this guy be published in the New Yorker by William Maxwell if he weren't a great writer? Yeah. He's a great writer.
He is.
He just has this freak cultural monolith to carry around with him. And I guess I would interpret what he does with the rest of his career and what he does with the rest of his life as a way of making the work the spiritual quest. So I asked my friends on this podcast to read 9 Stories. And I'm going to ask John Williams first. In New York City, an American man.
Through and through.
You'd never read 9 Stories before?
I hadn't. I had read The Catcher in the Rye way back when. And that's the only Salinger I had read. And I would gladly come back. I'm not inviting myself back, but I would do another 5-hour show on Salinger. Because I have a lot, like you do, I have a lot to say because I wasn't prepared for the variety of feelings I had and where he fit into so many different things in American culture and definitely in William James-ish ways, because The Catcher in the Rye, as far as I remember, I'm sure there is spiritual stuff in it, but the books I'm reading now, Franny and Zooey and 9 Stories, there's much more explicit, sort of verging on New Agey, very Eastern philosophy inflected seeking for experience and for wisdom. And I loved the story. I didn't love all the stories in the collection equally, but I found it really interesting. He has this really weird combination of like this sort of wised up, naive voice in terms of the tone. I'm not saying he's naive, but just the sense you get. It's very mid-century American and very mid-century, a certain kind of New York that, like you're saying, I think Wes Anderson would have created if he had lived back then.
And Mitch, what did you make of it?
I was absolutely amazed, I have to say. We have talked elsewhere about Catcher in the Rye, but that was the only Salinger I'd read. And, Rachel, my wife, is a massive Salinger fan and had always said I should read them. And I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting this cumulative kind of build-up through the 9 stories to 2 stories at the end, which are as interesting as any short stories I think that have been written in the second half of the 20th century by anyone, and much more spiritual and complex. What one Teddy and the other Domio Smith's Blue period. had William James written it after his book after, I'm almost certain that that he would have quoted the experiences in these stories as perfect examples of a particular variety of religious experience.
Dominier Smith's Blue Period in particular has a brilliant narrative conceit where a young man who seems fine goes to work tutoring in an art school, and it's only when he receives some artwork from a nun which has been sent in and then writes a letter to the nun that you realize he's not nearly as well as he seemed at first, right? So there has this brilliant thing in the letter to the nun which signs off, I mean, this made me laugh out loud. With sincere hope that you are enjoying completely perfect health, I am, yours respectfully, Jean de Daumier Smith, right? That's just one of the tells. And then near the end of the story, he has the very thing that William James writes about so often, where he says, the narrator says, something extremely out of the way happened to me some 15 minutes later, a statement I'm aware that has all the unpleasant earmarks of a build-up, but quite the contrary is true. I'm about to touch on an extraordinary experience, one that still strikes me as having been quite transcendent. And I'd like, if possible, to avoid seeming to pass it off as a case or even a borderline case of genuine mysticism. And then he goes on to describe that event and tie up the story over the course of a page in a way that I had to read 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
I don't want to read it on here because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who might read it. I mean, clearly getting into reading secret messages into J.D. Salinger doesn't lead anywhere good, especially as we've been playing bits from Beatles records.
But it's a genius decision to read that story on your part.
I was just really profoundly, spiritually, intellectually moved by that book and that story for the reasons you're talking about.
Yeah, there are that Teddy and I think Pharesmo with Love and Squalor are I mean, they're mind-blowing stories.
It made me, Blue Period, what it made me wish is that I had gone through my life writing down these moments, because the banality of the moment, the actual moment, is, I think, there have been moments where that's when that feeling has come over me, almost like it did in the Rothko Chapel, but it just wasn't noteworthy enough in its surrounding details to be noted by me.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we have to wrap up. I'm going to want to give the last word on William James to our guest, John. As people leave this podcast, filing out of our chapel into the sunshine, what will they get from reading this book?
I think they'll get solace. And I think they will understand themselves and other people better. That's a big claim, but I really think that's what they'll get.
In 2020, that's what we need from any book, isn't it? And I would like to thank John and the three of you today, actually. This is one of the books I've enjoyed most thinking about and getting ready to do Backlisted and anticipated this conversation, and it's been wonderful. So
it was like Christmas morning for me this morning. I was very excited and nervous. Thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I mean, formal thanks to John for helping us engage once more with a text which is, I think, as relevant, maybe more relevant than ever at the moment. And of course to Nikki for pulling our epiphanies into an intelligible oral experience, and to Unbound for paying for the nitrous oxide.
Oh, you can download all 116 previous episodes of this thing, plus follow links, clips and suggestions for further reading by visiting our website, backlisted.fm. And we're always pleased if you contact us on Twitter or Facebook or our new Instagram page.
Yep. And if you've enjoyed this, you could also show your love directly by supporting our Patreon at www.patreon.com/backlisted. We're trying to survive without paid for adverts, but quality demands time. So your generosity helps us buy that, and it's our sole source of income. All patrons get to hear Backlisted episodes early, and for less than the price of an online meditation course, Lock listeners get 2 extra Lock Listeds a month, the place where we go to commune with the higher power and find sounds, words, images and visions to share.
And actually, it might be worth mentioning that the next episode of Backlisted will be highlights from Locklisted.
That's a good point. Summer special.
We're not talking about one book next time. We're doing a summer special where we're taking some of the bits from Locklisted over the last few months, during the lockdown, and some of the books that we've read and enjoyed and talked about with one another. And so we hope that will provide you with a useful guide of things you could read over the summer.
It's pragmatic, it's plural, it's Jamesian in the full sense of the But now we have to read some names out for the lovely lot listeners. Shall I start?
Go.
Excellent Richard Bray, novelist and good man. Joe Elcote, Faye, Julia Van Tool, Anna Disley, Melanie Hunger, Sanjay Hazarika, Robin Muir, Rachel Malik.
Hi, Rachel.
Mark Ellingham, great publisher. Hi, Mark. Thank you. Stephen Maynard, Kylie Day, David Cooper, Sally Walden, Ewan Tant.
Ewan Tant, the great Ewan Tant. Hi, Ewan. I'd like to just bung in here our friends Nick Riddle and Joe Darling, who both contacted me this week and said, but where are we? There you are. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Joe. You're both brilliant listeners.
Keep the comments coming. We love hearing from you.
Jenny Brophy, Philippa Lang, Mary Reedy, Robin Herndon, Deborah Houghton, David O'Connell, Will Gore. Hi, Will. Patsy Irwin. Thanks, Patsy.
Thanks, Patsy. Still waiting for that Jilly.
Julian Gunn, Anita Simons, Jackie Fry, Jen Willis, Russell Strode, Helen Shavin, Sia Stewart. Thank you so much, everybody. We literally couldn't make this without you, so thank you.
Thank you. And that's it. Thank you for listening. We are back, as Andy says, in the main show in a fortnight. Or sign up for the Patreon and you get 2 extra shows each month. Thank you for listening. If you prefer to listen to Backlisted without adverts, you can sign up to our Patreon. It's www.patreon.com/backlisted. As well as getting the show early, you get a whole 2 extra episodes of what we call Lot Listed, which is Andy, me, and Nikki talking about the books, music, and films we've enjoyed in the previous fortnight.